When it comes to formidable queens, there are few who can rival Isabella of France. Known throughout Europe as the She-Wolf of France, Isabella played a pivotal role in bringing about the downfall of Edward II of England. But the turbulent times that followed were not always kind to her. Let's delve into the life and times of this legendary monarch. Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we'll be exploring the life of Isabella of France, also known as the She-Wolf of France. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to be notified when I upload a new video. So let's get started. 1. Dramatic introduction in the annals of history. Few queens have evoked as much intrigue and fear as Isabella of France. The She-Wolf of France is a name synonymous with power, cunning, and an unquenchable thirst for control. Imagine for a moment a time when diplomacy was a game of chess, where every move was calculated and every alliance forged with ulterior motives. This was the era in which Isabella of France held court. Her story is a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the lengths one woman would go to secure her place in history. But what was it about Isabella that earned her such a ferocious moniker? What events shaped her into the influential figurehead that commanded both respect and trepidation from her contemporaries? How did she navigate the treacherous waters of medieval politics? And what were the consequences of her actions not only for herself but for the future of England? These questions and more will be explored in today's documentary. Join us as we unravel the enigma of Isabella of France, the She-Wolf of France. Prepare to be captivated by a narrative that will challenge your perceptions and leave you questioning the true meaning of power. 2. Royal birth and French origins. Isabella of France, the She-Wolf of France, was born around 1295 to King Philip IV of France and Queen Joan I of Navarre. Her upbringing was in the heart of the opulent French court. As the daughter of the French king, Isabella grew up surrounded by the finest art, literature, and music that Europe had to offer. She was well educated and highly cultured, receiving instruction in subjects ranging from history to philosophy. But it was in the realm of political astuteness that Isabella truly excelled. Her father recognized her intelligence and keen understanding of often involving her in royal discussions and decision-making. Thus, by the time she was to marry Edward II of England, Isabella was no naive young girl. She was a force to be reckoned with. It was in 1308 that the diplomatic alliance between France and England was formalized with the marriage of Edward II to Isabella. At the tender age of 12, she arrived in England, ready to take on her new role as queen. What she found upon her arrival was not the warm welcome one might expect. Instead, it was a court rife with tension and intrigue. The seeds of discontent had already been sown, and Isabella's presence did little to quell the brewing storm. Her marriage to the 19-year-old Edward II was a mere formality to cement an alliance between France and England. It was not a union born out of love or affection, but one orchestrated by royal decree. Yet even in the early stages of this loveless marriage, cracks began to appear in the facade of the royal household. Edward's overwhelming favoritism towards his companion, Piers Gaveston, created a chasm of resentment between the young queen and her husband. From the moment Isabella set foot in England, she felt overshadowed by Gaveston, a man who seemed to hold more sway over the king than she did as his wife. This early display of favoritism was a harbinger of things to come, a clear indication that Isabella's role in the English court was not that of a queen, but merely a pawn in a game of power. As the years passed, Isabella's frustration grew. Not only was she sidelined in matters of state, but she was also subjected to humiliation at the hands of her husband and his favored companion. This was not the life she had envisioned for herself. The intelligent, strong-willed Isabella, who had navigated the intricacies of French court politics with ease, was now trapped in a gilded cage of her own, unable to exercise any real power or influence. And so began the saga of Isabella of France, a tale of a queen whose story would become a defining chapter in English history. Stay tuned for more insights into her life and legacy. 3. Rise of discontent and despair. The once harmonious court of King Edward II was now a battleground of shifting alliances and simmering resentments. At the eye of this storm stood Isabella, the Queen of England, her spirit broken by years of calculated humiliations orchestrated by her husband, King Edward II, and his newest favorite, Hugh Despencer the Younger. The turning point came when Edward bestowed upon Hugh Despencer the title of Earl of Winchester, a move that directly threatened Isabella's own position and power. This act of blatant disregard for the Queen's sensibilities was the last straw. All previous slights and snubs, all the whispers and rumors suddenly coalesced into a clear and present threat. Isabella was being systematically stripped of her status and dignity as queen, reduced to a mere figurehead by her husband's deliberate actions. In response, Isabella took refuge in one place. She could still exercise some measure of control, the privacy of her chamber. Here, away from the prying eyes and malicious whispers of the court, she found solace and plotted her next move. But it was a lonely existence, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the queen's role. In these moments of solitude, Isabella grappled not only with the betrayal of her husband, but also the stifling confines of the royal court. She yearned for action, for a chance to turn the tables and reclaim the power that had been unjustly taken from her. Little did she know that her opportunity was just around the corner. The court, once a place of relative stability, was now descending into chaos. The seeds of discontent sown by Edward's flagrant displays of favoritism had grown into a full-blown rebellion. The nobility, tired of being ignored and sidelined by the king, were ready to rise up, and Isabella, the wronged queen, found herself at the center of this upheaval. As the plotters made their move, they sought Isabella's support, recognizing in her a powerful ally against the king. For Isabella, this presented a unique opportunity to not only regain her lost status, but also to exact revenge on her husband and his favorites. The stage was set for a dramatic showdown, a clash of wills, and a fight for power that would ultimately change the course of English history. At this critical juncture, Isabella found herself torn between her personal feelings for her husband and her duty to her crown. The path ahead was fraught with peril, demanding difficult choices and unwavering resolve. The coming events would test not only her resilience, but also the very fabric of the English monarchy. 4. Rebellion B. 1325. Isabella's resolve had hardened into steel. No longer the naive young bride, she was now a woman on a mission, fueled by years of pent-up anger and humiliation. An opportunity presented itself in the form of a diplomatic mission to her home country, France, with the backing of her father, King Philip VI. Isabella saw a chance to escape the suffocating constraints of Edward's court and rally support for her cause. Upon arriving in France, Isabella wasted no time in making her intentions clear. She refused to return to Edward, branding him as her enemy, a stark contrast to the dutiful daughter and submissive wife she had been expected to be. This bold declaration shocked the English court and sent ripples of intrigue across Europe. With her father's support and the backing of the French nobility, Isabella was no longer the isolated queen at the mercy of her husband's whims. She had become a player in a high-stakes game of royal betrayal and power struggles. But it was not enough for Isabella to merely defy her husband. She wanted to bring him down. To achieve this, she formed an alliance with the exiled English noble Roger Mortimer, an alliance that soon blossomed into a full-fledged romantic relationship. Together, they hatched a plan to depose Edward and replace him with Isabella's son, also named Edward. It was a daring move, fraught with risk, but it was a risk worth taking for a chance to reclaim the power and respect that had been stolen from her. The rebellion was on, and the she-wolf of France was leading the pack. Number 6. Invasion of England. In the summer of 1326, Isabella and Mortimer raised an army and set sail for England. Their destination was the town of Essex, where King Edward II was staying. The king's forces were caught off guard, and by September, they had entered London. Edward II fled north with a small group of loyalists, but he was captured at the town of Berkeley soon after. Both Isabella and Mortimer knew that they weren't exactly liked by the hierarchy. He may have been unpopular with the public, but he was very popular with the ladies. By the year 1328, people were ready for a change. They were tired of Queen Isabella's spending, and they were tired of Mortimer's incompetence. She was allowed to keep her title and most of her wealth. Also, instead of being locked up in a tower somewhere, she was placed under comfortable house arrest in the town of Castle Rising in Norfolk. Here she spent her days hosting lavish parties and entertaining guests, and her nights praying and having secret lovers. Fortunately for them, Edward III was finally old enough to take control of his own kingdom. So they decided that the best course of action would be to rule through the young king. She died on August 23, 1358, at the age of 66. Considering her turbulent life, this was a very peaceful way to go. To this day, historians are unable to agree on what to make of Isabella. She was one of the first medieval queens to successfully overthrow a reigning king. It was also one of the few times in history when a woman seized power and held on to it. Sure, there were other queens who took the throne after their husbands died, but none of them had to fight for their power the way that Isabella did. This is what makes her story so unique. Historian Susan Reynolds describes her as a symbol of female agency in a male-dominated society. She was a woman who refused to be controlled by the men around her, and in doing so, she changed the course of English history forever. Was she a hero who saved her son's life? Was she a villain who murdered her husband? Or was she simply a product of her time, a woman who did whatever she could to survive in a man's world? You decide. However, rather than working together for the good of the kingdom, their shared power made them bitter rivals. Both wanted to be the most powerful person in England. Both wanted to be the one pulling the strings from behind the throne. Needless to say, this led to a lot of arguments. Queen Isabella took control of the royal treasury and spent the next 3 years showering herself and her followers with luxurious gifts. She lavished gold, jewels, and noble titles on all of her favorites. Unfortunately for the people of England, these favorites were mostly foreigners. Since Isabella preferred to surround herself with her own countrymen, she appointed many of her French and Flemish nobles to positions of power in her son's government. This, of course, didn't go over well with the English nobility, who thought that these positions should have been given to them instead. These power struggles and financial strains caused a lot of instability during Edward III's minority. But for Isabella, money was no object because she had plenty of it. In fact, she spent so much money that her son's realm went into debt. He was then taken to meet his wife and son at the town of Nottingham. Now, whether or not Isabella had planned to kill her husband from the start, or whether this was all just a lucky coincidence, the timing couldn't have been better. Once in front of the entire court, she forced Edward II to give up the throne in favor of their son, Edward III. Now, whether or not this was actually true or not doesn't really matter, because the truth was whatever the young king and his counselors wanted it to be. What matters is that everyone involved played along. A convenient trial ensued, and Mortimer was sentenced to death. He was executed on November 19, 1330, and his head was chopped off. His body was then thrown into a ditch where it slowly rotted away. Queen Isabella watched the execution from a tower window and was said to be very moved by the sight of her lover being put to death. Whether this was an act or not, she was very convincing. According to the chronicler Jean Fauvet, she immediately fell to her knees and covered her face with a veil. Then she walked to the altar and prayed for the soul of the deceased. Later, she had his remains dug up and buried next to his father in the Church of the Grey Friars. And so, at the age of 14, the young boy became king while his father was still alive. But it was clear that both mother and son would need to act fast to secure their power. At this point, Queen Isabella had more enemies than friends within the kingdom. There were several powerful nobles who would have preferred to see her son rule as king instead of her. So she did what any self-respecting 14th century queen would do. She had them all killed. But while these executions made her very popular among the people, they made her very unpopular among the nobles. They saw it as a power grab by the queen and her lover, Roger Mortimer. And as if this wasn't already obvious enough, Mortimer went ahead and made himself even more unpopular by assuming king-like powers. He showed up to the royal council wearing a crown and a cloak that was embroidered with the royal arms. Not surprisingly, this raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of suspicions. People started to ask questions like, what is this guy's deal? Why does he keep showing up to meetings with a crown on? And why does he always dress like the king? As you can imagine, these kinds of questions did not go over too well with Mortimer or Isabella. And now we come to number 7, rule through a son. Edward III was officially king, but he was only 14 years old, and he needed a guardian until he came of age. Then there was Mortimer, who spent his time hunting and having affairs instead of doing his job as regent. And now we come to no. 8. Fall from power. In 1330, when Edward III turned 18, he arrested Roger Mortimer and charged him with treason. Now, despite the fact that Queen Isabella's lover was executed for treason, she herself was not punished. And now we come to number 9. Final years and legacy. Isabella lived out the remainder of her days in relative peace. And now we come to number 10. Historical impact. Despite the turmoil that she caused, Isabella's legacy lives on. Thanks for watching.